I'd rather marry that beggar than marry you.
Is that so?
The morning Clara Whitmore was supposed to lose her ranch, Gideon Vale decided to ask her to marry him in the middle of the street. I did it on one knee, with a diamond ring in one hand and her father's mortgage in the other. By the time Clara realized what he was doing, half of Dry Creek had stopped to watch. A barber stood in his doorway with shaving foam still on one cheek. Two cowboys leaned over the saloon rail. Mrs. Bell from the bakery had come outside, holding a loaf of bread against her chest as if she feared someone might propose to her next. Gideon seemed delighted with the audience. "Marry me, Clara." Clara looked at the ring, then at the folded mortgage. "If this is your idea of romance, Gideon, I begin to understand why you're still unmarried." A few people laughed. Gideon did not. He unfolded the paper until Clara saw her father's signature. The sight of it took the humor out of her. "Thomas Whitmore owed me more money than that ranch will make in 10 years. Gideon said, "You know what happens when the note comes due." Clara knew. Whitmore Ranch was all she had left of her father. The house where he had raised her. The barn he had built with his own hands. The pasture where Clara had learned to ride before her feet could properly reach the stirrups. The cattle were mostly gone now. The fences leaned. The well gave less water every month. But it was still home. Gideon raised the diamond slightly. "Say yes, and the debt disappears." Someone murmured that she would be a fool to refuse. Clara wondered why people were always so generous when giving away someone else's life. "No." Gideon's expression barely changed. "Think carefully. You have no money, hardly any cattle, and the note comes due soon." "I know what I have." A cowboy near the saloon coughed to hide a laugh. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Your father is dead, Clara. There is nobody left to save that ranch." That struck where he meant it to. Clara felt the heat rise into her face. Gideon stood and brushed the dust from one knee. He was handsome in the polished way expensive things often were. And at that moment, Clara disliked every clean inch of him. "Be sensible," he said. "Who else would marry you?" That was when Clara stopped being sensible. Her eyes swept the street for the worst possible answer. They landed on a man sitting in the shade beside the general store. I was Apache, perhaps a few years older than Clara, though dust and exhaustion made it difficult to tell. His dark coat had a tear near one shoulder. His boots looked as though another mile might finish them. A battered tin cup sat in the dirt beside him. He had been paying no attention to the spectacle, which already made him the wisest man in Dry Creek that morning. Clara pointed at him. "I'd rather marry that beggar than marry you." The street went silent. Gideon stared at her. Then he looked at the Apache man and burst out laughing. The crowd joined him, cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Clara's anger lasted approximately 3 seconds longer than her courage, because the stranger had raised his head, and he was looking directly at her. She slowly lowered her finger. She had meant to insult Gideon. Instead, she had apparently volunteered a complete stranger for marriage. There were probably better decisions a woman could make before noon. Gideon spread his hands. "Well, there he is. Shall we fetch the preacher?" More laughter. Clara almost withdrew the words. Then Gideon smiled at her again, certain she would retreat. That smile ruined his chances. "I meant it." This time the laughter stopped. Across the street, the Apache man reached for the tin cup and rose. Clara's stomach dropped. "Oh, Lord," someone whispered. The stranger crossed the street. The crowd opened for him, without being asked. Up close, Clara saw that he was not as old as the weariness in his face had suggested. He was tall and lean, with a narrow scar along his jaw, and eyes so calm they made her own foolish heartbeat seem embarrassingly loud. He stopped in front of her. For several seconds, he said nothing. Clara wished he would laugh. She wished he would curse her. She even wished he would ask for money. Anything would have been easier than that quiet examination. Finally he spoke. "What is your name?" Clara blinked. "Clara." "Your whole name?" "Clara Whitmore." Something changed. It was small, no more than a tightening around his eyes. But Clara saw it. "Whitmore." "Yes." For one strange moment, he seemed to forget the entire town around them. Then he looked at her. "All right." Clara frowned. "All right, what?" "I'll marry you." Nobody laughed this time. Mrs. Bell nearly dropped her bread. Clara stared at him. She had spent the last 5 minutes refusing one marriage and, through an impressive combination of Pete and Bar's judgment, had apparently arranged another. Gideon's voice cut through the silence. "That's enough." There was no amusement in his voice now. The stranger turned toward him. As he did, a small silver seal slipped from beneath his torn shirt, hanging from a leather cord around his neck. Clara saw only an unfamiliar mark engraved into the silver. Gideon saw more. The color left his face. His eyes moved slowly from the seal to the stranger's face. The Apache man noticed. Neither spoke. Then the stranger calmly tucked the seal beneath his shirt. Clara looked between them. "What?" Gideon did not answer. A minute earlier, he had been standing in the middle of Dry Creek, with Clara's future in one hand and her father's land in the other, smiling like a man who already owned both. Now he was staring at a penniless Apache stranger with cracked boots and a tin cup. And Gideon Vale was no longer smiling. Before we find out why that silver seal wiped the smile from Gideon Vale's face, take a moment to like this story and subscribe to the Wild West Tales. We're riding toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and every new member helps keep these forgotten trails, hard-earned loves, and untold frontier stories alive. Now, let's get back to Clara and the mysterious Apache stranger she just promised to marry. Less than an hour after pointing at a stranger in the street, Clara Whitmore was standing beside him in the little church at the end of Dry Creek. It was not how she had imagined her wedding. There were no flowers, no family, and certainly no time to reconsider. Mrs. Bell had followed them from the bakery and somehow become a witness, still carrying the same loaf of bread. The preacher looked from Clara to the dusty Apache beside her, and wisely decided that whatever had happened before they entered his church was none of God's business he wished to question. Only when the preacher asked the stranger for his name did Clara realize she had agreed to marry a man without knowing it. "Elias Red Hawk," he said. Clara glanced at him. Elias did not glance back. A few minutes later, the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. That was when Clara's courage began to fail her. Outside the church, Elias handed her the marriage paper. "You should keep this. Why? You look less likely to lose it." It was the first thing he had said that sounded remotely like a joke. Clara almost smiled. By late afternoon, they were riding toward Whitmore Ranch on Clara's mare, with Elias walking beside her because there was only one horse between them. Clara offered him the saddle twice. He refused twice. The third time she decided stubbornness was apparently something they already had in common. The ranch appeared beyond a line of cottonwoods, weathered but standing. Elias stopped at the gate and studied the house, barn and empty corrals without comment. Clara suddenly saw the place through his eyes. The peeling boards, the sagging fence, the fields that had not seen enough rain. "It used to look better." "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking." "That's difficult to prove." This time she did smile. Inside, Clara put bread, beans, and yesterday's stew on the table. Elias ate slowly, as though a full plate was something he had learned not to trust. Her eyes fell on the battered tin cup he had set beside his coat. "How long were you begging in Dry Creek?" His spoon stopped. "Begging?" Clara pointed at the cup. Elias followed her finger. Then he looked back at her. "I wasn't begging." She frowned. "You were sitting in the street with a tin cup. A dog was thirsty." Clara stared at him. The cup was for a dog. He seemed to need it. Heat crept up her neck. So she had not only pointed at a stranger and called him a beggar before asking him to become her husband, she had apparently invented the beggar part too. "I owe you an apology." "Probably several." Clara looked up sharply. For the first time, she saw the faintest trace of amusement in his eyes. Then Elias returned to his stew and spared her the embarrassment of saying anything more. That kindness unsettled her more than mockery would have. Night settled over the ranch. Clara showed him the small spare room, but Elias shook his head. "I'll sleep in the barn. You are my husband. Since this afternoon. That still counts. So does being strangers." Clara had no answer to that. She found him a blanket. Hours later, unable to sleep, Clara stepped onto the porch. A figure stood beyond the fence. Elias. He was not looking at the barn or the house. He was staring north. Beyond the dark pasture, moonlight rested on the distant mountains. There was something strange in his stillness, something too intent to be simple admiration. Then Elias reached beneath his shirt and drew out the silver seal Gideon had seen in town. He held it in his palm and looked from the mark on the silver to the mountains. Once, then again. Clara remained in the shadows. The poor stranger she had married that morning was studying those mountains like a man trying to remember them, or like a man who had finally found something he had been searching for. Gideon Vale arrived at Whitmore Ranch the next morning, carrying no ring and wearing the pleasant expression of a man who had already forgiven someone for disappointing him. Clara saw him from the porch. Elias was repairing a broken rail near the corral. He looked up once when Gideon's horse approached, then returned to his work. "Congratulations," Gideon called as he dismounted. Clara folded her arms. "You rode 5 miles to tell me that. I was raised to have manners. Your parents must have been exhausted." Gideon smiled. That worried her more than anger would have. He climbed the porch steps, removed his gloves, and drew a folded paper from inside his coat. The mortgage. He laid it on the table between them. 30 days. Clara's smile disappeared. Gideon tapped the paper with one finger. "Your father's note comes due in 30 days. Marriage may have changed your name, Clara, but it did not change his debt." "I know. Do you?" His eyes drifted toward Elias. "Because your new husband doesn't appear to have brought much of a dowry." Elias drove another nail into the fence. He did not look up. Gideon seemed almost disappointed. Clara stepped between him and the yard. "If you came here to insult my husband, you've done it. You can leave. I came to offer you a way out." That stopped her. Gideon reached into his coat again and unfolded a small map of Whitmore Ranch. His fingers settled on the northern edge of the property. "Sell me this." Clara looked down. "The North Pasture, 800 acres. I'll cancel the entire debt." She stared at him. For a moment, she thought she had misunderstood. The North Pasture was the worst land her father owned. Hard soil, poor grass, and a creek bed that had been dry for years. Clara had once joked that even rattlesnakes carried their own drinking water when crossing it. "You'd forgive everything for that. Call it generosity." Clara nearly laughed. Nobody in Dry Creek had ever accused Gideon Vale of suffering from that particular weakness. Then a memory came back to her. Her father's room, dark and smelling of medicine. Thomas Whitmore struggling for breath, while Clara held his hand. His last clear words had made little sense at the time. Whatever happens, don't sell the North Pasture. Clara looked at Gideon. No. His expression did not change. I suggest you think about it. I just did. You have 30 days to find money you don't have. Then I suppose I'd better get busy. For several seconds, Gideon simply studied her. Then he folded the map. Your father was stubborn too. My father didn't like you either. A small smile returned to Gideon's face, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, he said. That cost him. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Gideon put on his gloves and walked back to his horse. Elias watched him ride away. Only when the dust had settled did he come to the porch. What's in the North Pasture? Nothing. Elias looked at her. Nothing. Rock, dead grass, a dry creek, enough rattlesnakes to start a church. Elias glanced at the mortgage still lying on the table, and Vale offered to erase all of this for it. Apparently, how much is the pasture worth? On a generous day. Clara considered it. Enough to disappoint a very optimistic cow. The corner of Elias's mouth moved. Then his eyes went north. Clara followed his gaze toward the distant hills and remembered the night before, when she had seen him standing beneath the moon with the silver seal in his hand. Her amusement faded. My father never wanted to sell that land, she said. Elias turned back to her. Why? I don't know. She hesitated. There were some memories that felt too private to give to a man she had known for less than 2 days. Husband or not. Elias did not press her. Instead, he picked up Gideon's map and studied the northern boundary. 800 acres of bad grass, he said quietly, in exchange for a debt worth several times that. He placed the map back on the table. Either Gideon Vale has suddenly become a charitable man. Clara gave him a look. Then we're in trouble already. That faint amusement appeared in Elias's eyes again, but it vanished almost immediately. He turned toward the northern mountains. Or there's something out there you don't know about. Clara felt a small chill, despite the afternoon heat. Elias stared toward the North Pasture for several seconds. Then he asked the question Clara suddenly wished she could answer. If that land is worth nothing, why does Vale want it so badly? Over the next several days, Clara discovered that Elias Red Hawk was a difficult man to keep idle. He repaired the western fence without being asked, reset the barn door that had dragged against the ground for 2 years, and somehow persuaded an old windmill to turn again after Clara had already threatened it with an axe. By the 4th morning, she found him rebuilding a section of corral before breakfast. You know, she said, carrying him a cup of coffee. Most husbands wait at least a week before they start improving their wives' property. Elias took the cup. Most husbands know their wives before they marry them. That sounds inefficient. His mouth twitched. Clara was beginning to recognize that as laughter. Later that afternoon, one of the remaining cows went down near the creek bed while trying to deliver a calf. Clara found Elias already kneeling beside her. For nearly an hour, they worked together in dust and blood until a wet, trembling calf finally dropped into Clara's hands and took its first breath. She laughed. Not politely. Not because something was amusing. She laughed because the calf was alive. The sound surprised her so much that she stopped. Elias was watching. What? Nothing. You're staring. I've never heard you laugh. Clara wiped her dirty hands on her trousers. I laugh. When? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her father had been alive the last time. Elias seemed to understand before she said anything. He looked away and gave her the mercy of silence. That evening, Clara found him on the porch with scraps of lumber at his feet. "What are you making?" "A chair." "We have a chair." Elias glanced at the single weathered chair beside the door. "Two people live here." Something about the simple answer caught her unprepared. She went inside before he could see it on her face. By sunset there were two chairs on the porch, one old, one new, and for the first time since Thomas Whitmore died, the house did not feel quite so much like a place waiting for someone who would never return. Elias still slept apart from her, though he had finally surrendered the barn for the small room near the kitchen. Clara noticed his boots remained beside the door each night, his few belongings packed neatly enough that he could leave within minutes. She told herself she did not care. She also noticed when, on the sixth night, the boots moved beneath his bed. The next morning, Elias asked her to show him the North Pasture. They rode out after breakfast. The land grew harsher as they traveled north. Grass thinned into pale patches between stone and dry earth. Elias spoke little, but Clara noticed his attention shifting from the ridge to the creek bed, then toward a narrow cut between two distant hills. "You've been here before," she said. "No. You keep looking around like you know where you're going." "I know country. Country you've never seen." Elias did not answer. That bothered her. Near the northern boundary, they found an old stone marker, half buried beneath brush. Clara had seen it as a child and never thought much of it. Her father had always forbidden the ranch hands from moving it. Elias dismounted. The moment his boots touched the ground, something in him changed. He pulled away the dead brush. A weathered symbol had been carved into the stone. Clara watched the color drain from his face. "Elias." He did not answer. His hand went beneath his shirt. When it came out, the silver seal rested in his palm, the same seal that had frightened Gideon Vale. Elias crouched beside the marker and brushed dirt from the carving. Clara stepped closer. Then she saw it. The mark cut into the stone and the mark engraved into Elias's silver were the same, exactly the same. Elias closed his fingers around the seal. "My father carried this," he said quietly. Clara looked at the stone that had stood on Whitmore land longer than she had been alive, then at the man she had married less than a week ago. For the first time, neither of them was wondering why Gideon Vale wanted the North Pasture. They were wondering what Elias Red Hawk's father had left there. They dug until the afternoon sun had moved halfway across the sky. Clara used a shovel from the ranch. Elias worked mostly with his hands, clearing packed earth from the base of the stone as carefully as if he were afraid of damaging something beneath it. After an hour, Clara leaned against the shovel. "If my father buried gold here, I forgive every unpleasant thing I've thought about this pasture." Elias kept digging. "If your father buried gold here, Vale would have brought more men. Let me enjoy the possibility." Another 20 minutes produced 3 rocks, an angry scorpion, and enough dirt beneath Clara's fingernails to purchase absolutely nothing. Then Elias stopped. His fingers had struck metal. The humor disappeared. Together they cleared the remaining soil and uncovered a small iron box wedged beneath the stone. Rust had eaten through one corner. The lock broke after 2 blows from the shovel. There was no gold inside, only paper. A bundle of old documents, wrapped in oilcloth, lay beneath a layer of dust. Time and damp had darkened the pages, and several pages had nearly fused together. Clara reached for them. Elias caught her wrist, gently. Something in his voice made her obey. They carried the box into the thin shade of a mesquite tree. Elias unfolded the oilcloth, while Clara separated the pages one by one. Most meant nothing to her. survey numbers, boundary descriptions, names of creeks that had changed years ago. Then she saw one she knew. Thomas Whitmore. Her breath caught. My father. Elias took the page. Another name appeared several lines below. Samuel Red Hawk. Elias went still. Clara looked at him. Who is Samuel? For a moment, he seemed reluctant to answer. My father. The dry wind moved between them. Clara looked from the two names on the page to the stone marker rising from the earth. Your father knew mine. I don't know. His name is buried on my father's land. I can see that. Then what do you know? Elias folded the page carefully. For the first time since she had met him, the calmness in his face looked less like peace and more like something built to keep other things confined. My father died when I was young. Before he died, he gave me the seal. His thumb moved across the silver mark. He told me that if I ever came back to this country, I was to find a man in Dry Creek. Clara already knew the answer. Still, she asked, Who? Elias looked at her. Thomas Whitmore. Clara sat back. The man she had chosen at random in the middle of Dry Creek had not been entirely random at all. Not to Elias. A cold thought entered her mind. Is that why you married me? Elias did not answer quickly enough. Clara rose. Is it? I didn't know who you were until you gave me your name. That isn't an answer. No. His voice remained quiet. It isn't. Before Clara could press him, a brittle sheet slipped from the bundle and landed face up in the dirt. Elias reached for it, then stopped. A date was written across the top. His expression changed. What is it? He handed the page to Clara. It was a notice from a territorial land hearing held nearly 20 years earlier. Samuel Red Hawk's name appeared twice. Thomas Whitmore's appeared once. Clara read further. The hearing concerned a disputed claim to land in the San Aurelio Valley. At the bottom was another date. Clara looked up. Elias was staring at it. My father died 3 days after that hearing. The wind lifted one corner of the old paper. Neither of them moved. Until that moment, Clara had wondered what her father had hidden beneath the North Pasture. Now she was beginning to wonder what Thomas Whitmore had been trying to hide from. They carried the iron box back to the ranch before dark. Along with the question, neither of them had answered. Clara said little on the ride home. Elias had married her only after hearing the name Whitmore. Now she knew his dying father had sent him looking for Thomas Whitmore. She wanted to ask again what that meant. She did not. Not yet. That evening they returned to the papers at the kitchen table. The notice they had found beneath the stone gave them a date. The other documents slowly gave them the story. Samuel Red Hawk had challenged a transfer of land in the San Aurelio Valley nearly 20 years earlier. Old boundary markers, water rights, and a survey made before Clara was born were mentioned again and again. So was one witness, Thomas Whitmore. Clara leaned closer. Her father had been called to testify that he had personally seen the old boundary markers and could verify Samuel Red Hawk's claim. For the first time that evening, hope entered Elias's face. If Thomas knew the markers were there, he could have proved my father was telling the truth. Clara felt it too. Perhaps this was why Samuel had sent Elias to find him. Perhaps her father had tried to help. She reached for the next page. The hope lasted less than a minute. 3 words sat beside Thomas Whitmore's name. Witness failed to appear. Clara read them twice. No. Elias took the page. Another document recorded the result. Without Thomas's testimony, Samuel's claim had been rejected. The disputed land was transferred into other hands. Clara looked toward the paper they had found at the stone. The date beneath it suddenly felt much heavier. 3 days after the hearing, Samuel Red Hawk had been found dead near Black Mesa. For a long time, the only sound in the kitchen was the ticking of her father's old clock. "There has to be more," Clara said. Elias kept reading. "My father wouldn't have abandoned him. We don't know what happened." "Then don't look at me like that." Elias raised his eyes. "Like what?" "Like you've already decided." His jaw tightened. "My father went into that hearing expecting Thomas Whitmore to stand beside him. You don't know that. He sent me here looking for him." "That could mean anything." "Yes." Elias placed the document on the table. "It could." The quietness of his answer frightened her more than anger would have. Clara stood. "My father was a good man." Elias looked at the papers between them. "Good men can still be afraid." "Stop, Clara. You didn't know him." "No, I didn't. He raised me alone. He worked this ranch until there was almost nothing left of him. Whatever happened 20 years ago, you don't get to sit in his house and decide what kind of man he was." Elias rose slowly. "I'm trying to understand why my father trusted yours, and I'm telling you, there must be another explanation." "Then prove it." The words struck harder than if he had shouted them. Clara stared at him. She wanted another page to appear, another signature, anything that would turn Thomas Whitmore back into the man she had known that morning. There was nothing, only his name and his absence. Elias looked toward the dark window. "Your father left mine alone when he needed him most. That's a lie." "Then prove that too." Clara's grief turned to anger, because anger was easier to carry. "I buried my father without you. I kept this ranch alive without you. I faced Gideon Vale without you." Elias became very still. Clara knew she should stop. Instead, she reached for the cruelest thing she could find. "I don't need you." Silence. Something disappeared from Elias's face. Not anger. Something warmer. He gave a single nod. "All right." Only after he walked away did Clara remember the promise he had made when their strange marriage began. "When you don't need me, I'll leave." And for the first time since Elias Red Hawk entered her life, Clara wished she could take back the words before they had time to become true. Clara knew Elias was gone before she opened his door. His boots were missing. So was the blanket she had given him on their first night, and the few belongings that had slowly begun to find places around the house. Outside, morning light stretched across the porch. 2 chairs stood beside the door. One was empty. Clara touched the back of the chair Elias had built and heard his words as clearly as if he were standing behind her. "When you don't need me, I'll leave." She had thought it was only something a proud man said. Now she understood. It had been a promise. The sound of hoofbeats came before she could decide whether to be angry with him or herself. Gideon Vale rode into the yard alone. His eyes went first to the house, then to the empty chair. So the husband didn't last. Clara stepped off the porch. "What do you want?" "The North Pasture." No congratulations this time, no pleasant smile. "You know my answer." "I know your father's answer. I've been hearing it for 15 years. Clara went still. Gideon seemed to realize he had said too much, but only for a moment. 15 years. He dismounted. "Thomas could have saved this ranch long before it became your problem. I offered him good money for that worthless piece of dirt more times than I can remember. And he refused every time. Why?" Gideon's eyes hardened. "You have 23 days left, Clara. After that, I won't need your permission." He unted again. Clara caught the bridle. What did my father know? For the first time, Gideon stopped pretending she was merely stubborn. Your father knew when to be afraid. He pulled the reins from her hand and rode away. Clara remained in the yard. 15 years. The number would not leave her. Thomas had failed to appear for Samuel Red Hawk when it mattered. Perhaps he had been frightened. Perhaps Elias was right about that. But then why keep the papers? Why protect the stone? Why refuse Gideon's money, year after year, while Whitmore Ranch slowly bled itself dry? Clara turned toward the house. The empty chair was still there, but she was no longer looking at it. She was thinking about her father's locked desk. For 20 years, Thomas Whitmore had guarded something buried in the North Pasture, and Clara was beginning to understand that a man trying to hide his betrayal would have destroyed the evidence. Her father had protected it. Clara had not opened her father's desk since the week he died. The key was still hidden behind the kitchen clock, exactly where Thomas had kept it for 20 years, while insisting it was a secret. Inside were tax receipts, cattle record, old bills, and a leather ledger worn smooth at the corners. Clara carried everything to the kitchen table. For the next hour, she followed the slow death of Whitmore Ranch through her father's handwriting. Cattle sold, fences postponed, loans taken, interest paid. Then she noticed something strange. Large sums had disappeared during years when the ranch had not needed them. Besides several entries, Thomas had written only initials, legal fees and records. Clara turned faster. There were payments to a territorial clerk, a surveyor, an attorney in Santa Fe. Money spent challenging transfers of land Clara had never known her father cared about. Thomas had not borrowed only to save the ranch. He had borrowed to save something else. Near the back of the ledger, Clara found an envelope. Her name was written across it. The letter inside had never been sent. Clara, if you are reading this, then I was a coward twice. Once when Samuel Red Hawk needed me, and once when I failed to tell you while I still had breath. Clara stopped. Her hands began to shake. She forced herself to continue. Thomas wrote that Samuel had asked him to testify about the old boundary stones in San Aurelio Valley. Thomas had seen them. He knew Samuel's claim was true. But men connected to the transfer had threatened the ranch and threatened Clara. She had been a child. Thomas became afraid. So on the morning of the hearing, he stayed home. 3 days later, Samuel was dead. Clara covered her mouth. There was no explanation that made her father innocent. No missing page that returned him to the man she had worshipped. Elias had been right. Thomas had failed his father. A tear struck the paper. Then Clara read on. I told myself I had chosen my daughter over another man. That lie helped me sleep for a while. It did not help me live. Thomas had spent the years afterward finding copies of Samuel's records before they could disappear. He paid lawyers to challenge later transfers. When Gideon began trying to buy the North Pasture, Thomas understood that someone was still searching for what Samuel had left behind. So he refused, year after year, even when the cattle died, even when the bank account emptied, even when Gideon offered enough money to save everything else. That was where the debt had come from. Not all of it, but enough. Clara lowered the letter. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to see Thomas Whitmore as something other than the best man she had ever known. He had been afraid. He had failed. And an innocent man had paid for that failure. Clara cried then, not because she had discovered her father was innocent. She cried because he wasn't, and because Thomas had known it. For 20 years, he had carried the cost of one cowardly morning and tried, imperfectly and too late, to put back what his fear had helped destroy. At the bottom of the letter was one final paragraph. Samuel said, there were 3 things needed to prove the original claim: the boundary record, the Red Hawk seal, and the survey bearing the territorial mark. I found the survey. I could not keep it here. If Samuel's son ever comes, take him to the old mission well at San Aurelio. Beneath the third foundation stone on the east wall, he will find what should have been his father's. Clara read the words twice. Samuel's son. Her father had known Elias might come. She looked toward the empty chair on the porch, then back at the letter. For the first time since Elias had walked away, Clara knew where he needed to go. The only problem was that she no longer knew where to find him. Elias returned before sunset reset. Clara heard a horse in the yard and ran to the porch, but stopped when she saw him dismount. For one foolish second, she wanted to throw her arms around him. Instead, she gripped the porch rail. You came back. Gideon was asking about you in town. The answer hurt more than it should have. So that's why. Elias looked at her, but Clara did not give him time to answer. I found my father's letter. That stopped him. Inside, she placed Thomas's confession on the kitchen table. You were right, she said. I was afraid. He promised to testify for Samuel. And when the day came, he stayed home. Elias read in silence. Clara forced herself to continue. Your father paid for my father's fear. I won't ask you to forgive that. Elias reached the final pages. His expression changed as he read about the years Thomas spent recovering records, fighting transfers, and refuting Gideon's offers. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully. It doesn't change what he did. No. Clara looked at her father's handwriting, but it changes what he did afterward. Elias said nothing for a long moment. Then Clara showed him the final paragraph. An hour later, they were riding toward the abandoned San Aurelio mission. They found the old well behind a roofless chapel. Beneath the third foundation stone on the eastern wall, wrapped in rotting canvas and sealed inside a narrow metal case, was a survey bearing the territorial mark. Elias held it without speaking. His father had died trying to prove what that paper might finally prove. As Clara watched him, another truth became impossible to avoid. If they succeeded, Elias would have what he came for, and no reason to stay. Elias, he looked up. There's something else I was wrong about. He waited. I told you I didn't need you. I remember. 2 quiet words, and Clara wished again that she could take back that morning. I meant it when I said it. I wanted to hurt you, because you showed me something about my father I couldn't bear to see. Elias looked down at the survey. Clara stepped closer. I don't need you to save my ranch. His eyes returned to hers. I want you to stay. The hardness in his face softened. The first day you pointed at me, he said, I agreed to marry you because you said the name Whitmore. I know, but that isn't why I stayed. Clara's breath caught. Elias gave the smallest smile. I kept waiting for you to give me a reason to leave. Did I? Several. Despite herself. Clara laughed. And yet you're here. That became the problem. This time she understood. Clara reached for his hand. Elias looked at their joined fingers, then back at her. When he kissed her, there was no crowd watching, and no man forcing either of them to choose. There was only the ruined mission, the fading light, and 2 people who had finally stopped pretending their marriage was merely an accident. The kiss was brief. It was enough. They returned to the ranch after dark and spread everything across Thomas's table. The old boundary record, the Red Hawk seal, the territorial survey. Elias pressed the silver seal against the faded mark on the survey. It matched. Clara traced the boundary with her finger. North Pasture. Elias shook his head. Keep going. The line crossed Whitmore Ranch, then the river, then Vale's property. Clara frowned and followed it farther. It circled Dry Creek, continued west, then north toward the mountains. Her hand stopped. Elias. He was staring at the map. Samuel Red Hawk's claim did not describe 800 acres. It covered nearly the entire San Aurelio Valley. Whitmore Ranch stood inside it. Vale Ranch stood inside it. Dry Creek itself stood inside it. Clara looked at the man who, days earlier, had walked beside her horse because he did not own one. Elias, do you understand what this says? He stared at the land beneath their feet as though it had suddenly become something he no longer recognized. Before he could answer, a voice came from the doorway. I do. Clara turned. Gideon Vale stood there, his eyes fixed on the survey. The pleasant smile was gone. His hand rested on his revolver. That paper dies tonight. Gideon stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind him. Give me the survey. Clara moved first. She swept the paper from the table and held it against her chest. Gideon's revolver cleared its holster. Elias stepped between them. Move. No. Gideon gave a short laugh. You still don't understand what that paper means. I think I'm beginning to. It means every ranch in this valley becomes yours. Every house, every well. Men who spent 30 years building something here wake tomorrow and discover an Apache owns the ground beneath their beds. Elias glanced at the survey. For a moment, Gideon saw hesitation and seized it. Give me the paper, and nobody has to lose anything. Clara looked at him. Except Elias. Gideon's eyes hardened. His father made the same mistake. He thought being right would protect him. Elias became still. Clara felt the meaning before Gideon realized what he had admitted. You knew Samuel Red Hawk. Gideon said nothing. You knew what happened to him. I knew he wouldn't let go. Elias took one step forward. Gideon's thumb pulled back the hammer. Clara caught Elias's arm. Not because Gideon deserved mercy. Because Elias deserved not to spend the rest of his life carrying him. Then hoofbeats sounded outside. Many of them. Gideon turned toward the window. Lanterns were moving into the yard. The territorial marshal entered first, followed by a clerk and several men from Dry Creek. Gideon's face changed. Clara almost smiled. Before leaving for the mission, she had sent Thomas's letter and ledger to the town attorney with instructions to wire the territorial land office in Santa Fe. Thomas had spent years filing objections and purchasing certified copies of Samuel's records. The survey in Clara's hands was not the whole truth. It was the piece that made all the others impossible to ignore. Gideon lowered the revolver. By morning, the secret Thomas Whitmore had protected for 20 years no longer belonged to one frightened family. It belonged to the record. The months that followed changed San Aurelio Valley. Transfers tied to Gideon's claims were investigated. Mortgages built upon fraudulent titles collapsed. Gideon lost the land he had taken through them, and eventually, much more than land. But the greatest surprise came from Elias. The law gave him grounds to challenge nearly every property inside Samuel Red Hawk's original claim. He could have emptied ranches. He could have taken Whitmore Ranch from Clara. He could have become exactly what Gideon had always believed a powerful man should be. He refused. Families who had bought their farms honestly were allowed to remain. Existing homes and working ranches were protected through new agreements. Water access was secured so no single rancher could control the valley by controlling its wells. The northern grounds containing the old boundary stones and places sacred to Elias's Apache community were placed beyond private sale. Gideon's holdings received no such mercy where fraud could be proved. Someone once asked Elias why he had not taken everything the papers said he could. Elias looked across the valley. His father had died trying to protect. My father wanted the truth returned, he said. Not every family punished for a lie they didn't tell. For most of his life, Elias Red Hawk had owned almost nothing. Then, almost overnight, the law told him he could claim nearly everything beneath the horizon. Only then did Clara understand what separated him from Gideon Vale. It was not how much land a man could own. It was what he chose not to take when he finally had the power. By the following spring, Whitmore Ranch still looked like Whitmore Ranch. The barn needed paint. The western fence leaned whenever the wind grew ambitious, and the old windmill had developed a squeak Elias claimed gave it character. Clara claimed it needed oil. Neither had won the argument. There were more cattle in the pasture now. Water ran again through the lower field, and some evenings Clara could hear laughter from the house before she remembered it was her own. Elias could have lived almost anywhere in San Aurelio Valley. On paper, thousands of acres carried the weight of his name. He chose the same small room at Whitmore Ranch, though it was no longer really his room. His boots had disappeared from beside the door months ago. They rested beneath Clara's bed now, and neither of them had ever discussed when that happened. One evening, Clara found him sitting on the porch. The chair he had built stood beside the old one, weathered now by sun and rain until the two no longer looked so different. Clara sat beside him. Beyond the fence, the valley stretched gold beneath the setting sun. "You know," she said, "you don't have to stay." Elias turned slowly. Clara managed to keep a straight face for almost 3 seconds. "I own half the valley, and you're throwing me out." "Nearly the whole valley. That makes it worse," she laughed. Then her expression softened. "I mean it. Elias, you don't owe me anything. Not for the ranch. Not for my father. Not because of what happened in Dry Creek." He watched her quietly. Clara reached for his hand. "I don't need you. Elias." Something flickered in his eyes. She remembered the empty chair. So did he. This time Clara did not let the silence last. "I want you." Elias looked down at their joined hands. "That's different." "Very. And if I stay?" Clara leaned closer. "Then tomorrow, you can fix that windmill." He sighed. "I knew there was a catch." She kissed him before he could complain further. Then Elias settled into the chair beside Sadie's hers. The first time Clara Whitmore had chosen Elias Red Hawk, she had done it because she wanted to escape another man. The second time, she chose him because she finally understood the man beside her. And Elias, who had inherited more land than he had ever imagined owning, finally understood something his father had spent a lifetime trying to protect. Land was something a man could own. Home was something different. Home was the place where, after a lifetime of being told to move on, someone looked at him and asked him to stay.